Hello, this is the NICU Lived Network, and we are your hosts. I'm Melinda.
I'm Nat.
And I'm Emma. We are all NICU mothers using our lived experience to partner with health professionals to impact research, advocacy, and clinical practice.
Each week we will bring you something new. It could be a topic highlight, the latest in research, or ways in which you can use your lived experience within the NICU to impact change. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this episode of the NICU Lived Network. Hi, Emma. Hi, Nat. How are you?
Yeah.
So good to be back for another episode. On this special episode that we have for you today, we have Associate Professor Atul Malhotra. Hello, how are you?
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So Atul is a senior neonatologist and researcher at Monash down in Melbourne. Rather than go into your whole bio, we'd love to hear from you in your own words about yourself.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks for having me. Like I said, so I'm a neonatologist who works part-time at the NICU at Monash in Melbourne. Most of my work actually goes, or my time goes in research. So I head a small but growing team of researchers, students, and scientists where we work on newborn cell therapies, for which I'm going to talk more about, but basically trying to discover and translate therapies for babies, especially those premature and babies with brain injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was reading your bio and it says that that's what your focus is on, in improving respiratory and neurological outcomes of high-risk infants, and that you're also the head of the Early Neurodevelopment Clinic at Monash Children's Hospital. So, and that's for the early detection of cerebral palsy and developmental delay.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, we run a clinic, which was one of the first clinics in Australia, where we implemented kind of guidelines from the Cerebral Palsy Alliance and a number of groups around the world, where the idea is to pick up signs of cerebral palsy or early features of cerebral palsy or significant developmental delays very early, like 3 to 4 months post a preterm baby or a term baby's due date. And in that way, we can start early intervention as early as possible, basically trying to harness the neuroplasticity and, the rewiring of the brain with those signals which we give them through therapies. So I'm sure all of you are very aware of how preterm babies and babies who have suffered any birth complications are at risk of brain injury and specifically cerebral palsy and motor delays. The idea of that clinic is to pick up those. Interestingly, we are presenting some of those findings at a North American meeting as we speak. So one of my students is presenting on some of the findings from that clinic, which is very good. So this clinic is standard of care at Monash, which is lovely. So it's not part of research, but obviously we keep evaluating quality, improving our standard of care pathways as well. So that clinic is really dear to me. It started around 6 years ago, and as part of the research which we do, all of our babies, even in research studies, we like to go take them through that clinic so that because it's standard of care, it's easy to incorporate. So I can talk more about it as we go along.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question? The clinic in at Monash, it sounds like a great initiative. Is that the clinic something that's only accessible to families in Melbourne, or do you find that families from elsewhere come and access that clinic?
It's a good question, Nat. So like I said, it is a standard of care clinic. So we service our catchment area, which is around southeast Melbourne, which caters to around 1.5 million people, basically south of the river Yarra and beyond, down to the Gippsland and the country. So we kind of look after any family who is in that region. Having said that, if a family wanted to come and visit us, it's fine. But I think the network works best, or the follow-up for the intervention works best if they are in the area, so that we can link them with community. Basically, end of the day, if we give a family or the baby an early diagnosis and we say that the diagnosis is not important, it is the intervention which is important, we link them with NDIS. So we would help them with the NDIS paperwork or Centrelink paperwork to be able to access the services. So I hope it answers your question, but basically it works for families to be able to access care in the community they live.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So I have 100 questions, but I guess starting with the fundamentals, I guess really keen to understand, I guess, if you can tell us a bit more about the neonatal cell therapy trials, that'd be really interesting to understand, I guess, the trials that you're doing, but also how it came about. That was my other question. I've got two in one there, but yeah, I guess how it came about, and I guess some of the trials that you're doing and finding results from.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I love talking about cell therapies. So I've been a neonatologist for around 20 years. And in the, I would say, first 5 to 7 years, doing the routine neonatal care, as you all have lived experience with this, we know that we can offer many of our premature babies and babies with problems at birth a lot of care and a lot of hope going forward. But unfortunately, number of them continue to have complications. And I think those complications and their you can say long-term prognosis hasn't improved a lot over the last 2 or 3 decades now. Cerebral palsy rates, for example, have actually come down in Australia, and Australia is one of those countries where those rates have come down. But most of those have come down, I think, due to the improvement in obstetric care, the provision of antenatal steroids, magnesium sulfate, delayed cord clamping, and so on. We still have a high burden of disease, unfortunately, in a number of these babies and families. And I'm sure you are in your networks, you come across them all the time, where I felt the need as a neonatologist that we needed to do more. So it is interesting that from a personal level, that's when I reached out to my scientist colleagues. I'm very lucky to be at Monash because we have a very great research institute co-located on our site. And we have scientists, basically at hands distance where we can talk to them, discuss with them, and actually collaborate with them. And I actually did a basic science PhD. So I was a full-time clinician, and I went part-time and I did a basic science PhD, nothing to do with the real babies. We were doing all lab and preclinical work in developing brain injury models for babies, and then trying to look at therapies. So that's where my interest developed in cell therapies, and my own PhD had a cell therapy study. And slowly and surely, I saw the benefits in the lab, and then we wanted to translate it into humans. That's where the journey started. So our first cell therapy trial started around 12 years ago. It was a long journey. It took 10 years of work in the lab to get that study into a clinical trial. Obviously, those 10 years of work was not my work. It was my collaborators. And then slowly, what we've done is, since I did my PhD, we've been doing more of the work which was directly related to my group, the science group I'm attached to bring it to clinic. So now I'll talk more about it. We have a number of cell therapy trials running at Monash, and Monash is one of the most active sites of cell therapy trials. I'm really proud and privileged to be part of it anywhere in the world. So we finished 2 cell therapy trials in the last few years, and we have 3 ongoing trials at the moment. So that's a lot of cell therapy work, and I'll talk more about it. But before I talk about them, I think it's important for your listeners to understand what is cell therapies.
I was about to ask.
Yeah.
Because in social media or in any media, you might hear a lot of people saying about stem cells and stuff like that. I like to call it cell therapies. So stem cells is a particular type of cell therapy. So to start off, cell therapy is a biological cell which has got the potential to have a therapeutic effect, cell and therapies. So all of us have biological cells. Not every cell in our body has got the potential to actually repair or help us with things. So some of our cells are there to serve a function, but not every cell of our body can be given to someone to actually improve their life. So for example, the best cell example is red blood cells. So when we get a blood transfusion, basically we are giving a cell therapy. We are giving them cells which is going to improve their kind of hemoglobin and their capacity to move oxygen in their body. What we try to harness is those cell therapies which have got specific effects on various different organ systems in the body to kind of take the advantage out of that. So, if I give a cell therapy which has got some beneficial effects on their brain function, or some cell therapies which have an effect on their lung function, you will agree with me that that's obviously going to be giving them hope that we will be able to improve their outcomes as compared to what they currently have. So that's the idea of cell therapies. Stem cells, on the other hand, have got 2 distinct properties which not every cell has. Stem cells are cells which have got the potential to replicate on their own. So, you start off with one cell and it keeps dividing and growing. The commonest example of a stem cell is our fetal cells. When we start off with it as an embryo, it divides quickly and it starts becoming a bigger thing. And also, it not just divides, it differentiates into different organs. So, if you talk to children when they're learning about biology and how a baby is born or is formed, it starts off as a single type of cell, but slowly it differentiates into different organs. Some become the eyes, some the heart, some the lungs, some the gut, and so on. So those are stem cells. Not all cell therapies are stem cells, and that's why I kind of warn any listener or any person talking about stem cells that just be careful what you're talking about, because most therapies which we use are not stem cells. So that's why our group is called the Newborn Cell Therapies Group, and we advocate for people knowing what kind of cell they're dealing with before saying that this is stem cell or not. Most of the cells are actually not stem cells. They are cells which have got the properties to repair, protect, and in some cases regenerate. So if they are regenerating, they might form under stem cells, but not every cell therapy is stem cells. So I don't know if it helps your understanding, but basically that's what we do. We move biological cells into different individuals to see if we can benefit them.
Yeah, no, that makes so for something that's potentially really complicated, it's like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
Nice explanation on the difference. Yeah. So with you said you've done a couple of trials already. Be really interested to understand the trials that you've run, just so we can get a bit more understanding, because it's a really nice explanation around the cells, but how those trials have worked and which, what you're looking to achieve from doing that would be great.
Yeah. So and that will segue into our current trials, for which I need your help and your advocacy to spread the word, because more people learn about this, more people get interested and more aware of it. So the first trial which we did was looking at a particular type of cell therapy called amnion cells. So the amnion cells are the layer of the placenta. So the placenta has got a couple of layers: the amnion, the chorion, and then the fetus itself with the amniotic fluid around. Amnion is a membrane of the placenta which has got some really interesting properties. Obviously, it protects the baby while they're in the womb, and especially from supporting the baby while there's movement and so on. But most importantly, those amnion membranes have got very good regenerative properties. In fact, amnion membranes are used for burns in patients. Amnion membranes have been used for corneal ulcers in the eyes as well, because they've just got a very strong regenerative property. They are not complete stem cells, so they do not differentiate into different organ tissues. So they are kind of stem cell like, but most importantly, like I said, they are a potential cell therapy. And around 12 years ago, we started to do the first translation of that amniotic cell therapy into a human. So we were the first group in the world to actually give amnion cells to any human of any kind. And can you believe it? The first human to get those amniotic cells was actually a baby with severe bronchopulmonary dysplasia or chronic lung disease, as you might be aware. Premature baby who have chronic lung problems. They were the first, or they were the first baby or any human to get it. So that was the first in human trial. And then what we did was we saw that it is safe for any therapy to be trialed first time in humans or patients. First, you need to show safety. So these are called phase 1 trials. Is it even safe to give it to them? And in some cases, feasibility, is it too hard to give it to them? So it was not hard, because we can give it through an intravenous. And this is after a decade of work in the preclinical space, testing it on the lab, testing it in animal models of injury and so on. We knew that it's going to be fine, but till you do it, it is always a nervous moment, you can imagine, for the team giving it. So we had many nervous moments when we first started to do it. Obviously, this is all ethically approved and supported by the hospital and our other clinicians and collaborators. So it's like it took us 3 years to get it through ethics, through a program which was well supported, and we had everyone on board. And obviously a lot goes for the families as well, and obviously we involve families through the design of such studies, as well as through obviously the consenting process and that journey. So we started off with that trial. We did a small trial of 6 babies, and then we went on to do with the same cell therapy type, the amniotic cells. we did another trial where we tried to increase the dose amount we were giving these babies with those cells. So that trial was conducted in collaboration with the Royal Women's Hospital, and we had a PhD student doing that, where we basically tried to do a dose escalation study of what might be the safest and most optimal dose to give babies who are at risk of chronic lung disease. So there's a premature babies. If we give them early, can we actually prevent them developing those long-term complications of lung disease? So that trial finished last year, and we are in the process of writing it up. But the idea is basically to see if that trial can progress, or that therapy can progress into a larger trial. So watch the space there. We haven't been able to progress it to a larger trial yet, but we are working on it. So that's an example of a cell therapy work. So, it took us 10 years to get to the clinic, and then another 3 or 5 years for it to come to a level where we could establish that it's safe and it's feasible.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I started to work on my PhD, which was looking at cells or cell therapies, including some stem cells, or what we call progenitor cells. These progenitor cells are cells which do not have exact stem cell properties. Remember, stem cells have two properties: uh, ability to replicate and ability to differentiate into different organs. Progenitor cells, on the other hand, are cells which have got properties of not both these properties, but they have properties which can actually be at a higher level than our fully differentiated adult cells. So basically, if I have got a cell which produces, let's say, white cells, the progenitor cells can produce more than just the white cells. They can produce a number of other cells. So I don't know if it makes sense, but they don't necessarily replicate, but they can actually do a bit more. So those are progenitor cells. And cord blood, so the blood in the umbilical cord, is a rich source of stem cell or progenitor cells. And that's what my PhD and a number of other PhDs in our lab started to look at in the last 10 years. So we looked at the benefits of cord blood in various types of brain injury. So our lab particularly has expertise in brain injury models. So we started to look at brain injury from a premature inflammation or infection point of view, from a birth asphyxia, which is poor condition at birth, point of view. Are these cells beneficial? And what we saw, very surprisingly, was that they were beneficial. What works in the lab doesn't necessarily work in the clinic, and you might have heard of a number of therapies which people have tried and had a lot of promise. You might have heard of a trial from erythropoietin recently in the States, where they tried to do it for babies who suffer significant problems at birth, and in the clinical trials they did not work. So testing these therapies, whether it's cell therapies or any therapies, rigorously in the clinic is really important. So we started to translate those cord blood work into the clinic, and we started to first do it in preterm babies. So this is again in strong consultation with ethical committees, with parents, and trying to understand what would be acceptable. So the first trial we did with cord blood, which was around 5 years ago, we started that trial, and you'll be pleased to hear that that is completed, and I'll share with you some of the results and how we are progressing it forward. Is that for the first time anywhere in the world, we started to see if we can actually harvest or collect these cells or that blood, that cord blood, from extremely preterm infants. So these are infants who some of you might have own lived experiences with, uh, who were born less than 28 weeks. So these are really small, tiny babies, less than 1 kilo in most cases, very fragile, very vulnerable. So when the baby is born, you can imagine they would have delayed cord clamping, as is normal practice for most of these babies nowadays. And then after that, we would start collecting blood from their tiny umbilical cords. And you'll be surprised that we got volumes of 30-40 mils in some of these babies. So the baby themselves would weigh 600-700 grams, and we would get 30-40 mils of blood, which would normally be thrown away. So that blood, the umbilical cord blood, has got a rich resource of cells, like I mentioned, which are stem cells. Some of them are stem cells, some of them are progenitor cells, and they've got a lot of other cells which have got these properties, which we have tested in the lab, which we think can protect their brain and even repair their brain to some degree. So that was really exciting for us. So we did this trial. One of my PhD students, Lindsay, led that trial, and we recently actually presented it at Christchurch as well, where Mel was, and it was very well received, that study. Basically, we showed that it is feasible. it is feasible in up to 80% of cases to collect enough blood so that we can harvest those cells, many of them stem cells, which may be beneficial to the baby. And what we did was we not only proved the feasibility of collecting those cells or cell therapies from the cord blood, but also we gave it back to these babies. So this was autologous therapy. That means the baby's own blood being given back to the babies to see if it is safe. Now you'll say, why will it not be safe? It is safe, you would expect, because it's the baby's own cord blood derived cells. But when we take out these cells, we concentrate them, we extract the most important components of those cells and then give it back. We are not just giving back the blood which we took out back to them. We are actually taking out and extracting and harvesting those cells which we think are most beneficial. And while we are doing that, we are obviously not manipulating the cells, but we are handling the cells. So handling anything outside a body and then giving it back has got a potential risk, as you can understand. But we did it in a very careful manner, again approved by the TGA in a TGA approved facility, and then very carefully handled, and so much rigorous testing before those cells were given back to the baby. Now, sometimes people ask me, why would it help if those cells were already circulating in the baby before? Why would it help? So I'm kind of prefacing what you might be thinking already. The idea is that you are extracting those cells which are going to be thrown away otherwise, because with the placenta and the cord, as you know, after birth, those are thrown away. We are concentrating those cells and giving those cells back to the baby after a week, when they do not have access to those cells. The baby is out into the world facing a whole new, I like to say, barrage of inflammation. There's a whole new extra inflammatory process going on, because in keeping these babies alive, doctors, nurses, and everyone else in the NICUs obviously are doing a lot of artificial things. They've got tubes in them. They've got, various types of ventilation going into them, different types of chemicals, and, nutrition going into them, which is not natural, as you can imagine. So they are being hit with a very big inflammatory process. And when we give these cells back to them after a week or 10 days, we believe that will benefit them there. So excitingly, I'll take a pause here and I'll share very quickly with you one of the next steps of this trial, which is very exciting, and I want people to be aware of it. I hope you can see that. So this is the cord cell RCT. So what we are doing is, in babies less than 28 weeks, we are going to study a big population of around 330 or so babies. This is around the world, not just in Australia, but in the US, in Canada, and in Singapore at the moment. And we might have more centers join later on, where we are going to collect cells from these babies, from babies' own cord blood, and then do what is called a randomized control trial. So, we know that these cells are safe and feasible, but we don't know if they actually improve outcomes. And, again, we had a very strong parent consultation on this, because, we wanted to understand, if I take your baby's blood and then I may or may not give that back to you, those cells back to you, how would you feel? So because we don't know if they definitely help, the families were very happy to actually test it rigorously, because obviously all this requires a bit of process. It's a lot of expense involved as well. And then if it's not useful, we can't make it a standard of care till we prove that it's beneficial, if that makes sense. So we are going to test in a randomized control trial, where half of them will get those cells from their own cord blood and half of them will just get a placebo, and will be blinded. So neither the parent or the nurse or the doctors will know which therapy they are getting, so that we have no bias. That's the best way to do a trial, to show whether their outcomes, which what we are looking at is long-term outcomes. It doesn't matter if their short-term outcomes change a little bit. It's most important is, in the long term, after 2 years, are they surviving with less major disability? So very kind of ambitious trial, and I can only hope that it shows benefit, and then we'll move to the next steps of whether it can actually change outcomes. But I hope you're able to understand where we have gone with that work. So I might stop here for a moment to get any reflections on this trial, which I would love for your networks to be aware of. We are running it in Melbourne, in Sydney and Brisbane, in the next 12 months or so. It takes a while to get every center on site to come on board, but that's the plan.
Just curious with the long-term follow-up, that's fascinating. Like, how far is that long-term follow-up window? Is it only from like at age 2, or are we talking like 2 for the next couple of years until school age?
Very good question, Nat. With any research comes a lot of expense in being able to kind of justify follow-up, because obviously everything requires experts, personnel, researchers to actually do those tests. So in most centers, 2-year follow-up is standard of care. Okay.
Yeah.
In some centers, they are able to drag it to 5 years or even beyond. But most of the follow-up after 2 years is research funded. So what that means is that it's not standard of care. So till 2 years, we'll definitely follow them up, and then hopefully, we will get funding from the Commonwealth government and other philanthropic organizations to be able to justify longer-term follow-up. But yeah, some of those centers actually have up to school age follow-up, Nat, but not everyone. So the minimum in neonatal trials, most of the time, the minimum follow-up is till 2 years, because all of us, I'm sure all of you have been through that. 2-year follow-up is almost standard of care. Beyond that, it is variable.
Yeah, and that, I guess this is when my personal bias comes in. Like, oh, it'd be great if it was all like as long as possible, 5 years. Because I found with myself and also with heaps of other families was like, everyone did that 2 years. Like, yeah, okay, but really the issues came at that 5 years school age. Like, that was like, that's where it was like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe strongly in that. I think a lot of the benefits from these therapies or any therapy sometimes is not evident at 2 years. It is evident at 5 or even 10 years. So what we're doing in the meanwhile is we'll be doing a lot of sophisticated brain imaging as well. And I'm sure you're aware, some of the brain scans which we can do are really predictive of longer term outcomes at school age or even at 12 years of age. Kind of. So the problem is, again, not every center has that sophisticated brain imaging. So we will be doing that. If I had one center like our center doing everything, I would have just said my main outcome is the brain imaging, because that will predict my long-term outcomes much beyond 2 years. But for the purposes of keeping it as generalizable as possible, we will do the 2-year. But I'm sure that we will continue to see a lot of follow-up, both from their development point of view, but also from imaging point of view, which is very predictive. So, we have a lot of resources nowadays where we can get a good handle of what they're likely to be from a learning or cognition point of view in school as well. The tricky ones are behavior. I'm sure you have experience of behavior issues in our preterm and sick babies. The behavior testing is slightly more difficult in imaging. It is getting better, but not so. So we are very good at picking up motor problems like cerebral palsy and all that at a very early age. We are getting better at picking up learning problems or cognition problems. The behavior problems still, they need beyond 2-year follow-up, because those attention deficit, autism, and so on, anxiety is such a common problem, isn't it? Starts to come up much later, and we don't have good tests to predict or pick it up at an early age.
And with the follow-up, are you guys looking or focusing on a specific issue? Like, is it like a real focus on cerebral palsy, or is it just kind of you've just got this right?
No, most of those 2-year follow-ups will have a broader range of testing. So we use the Bailey's assessment, which basically covers cognition, motor, and also sensory deficits. So things to do with their vision, their hearing, with any of their other developmental problems is all covered. So our idea is to decrease their disability due to the brain function at any level. So it's a very ambitious trial. We're going to go live in the next couple of months in Melbourne, and then slowly we'll start including or not including, but getting other sites on board.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's super interesting. It'd be amazing to see the results of the trials once you've run them as well, just to see. Having a 9, as Nat would say, I think we've got similar age boys, haven't we, Nat? So we're at the sort of 9-year-old stage of, you can see, you see more now than probably you would have done at 2 years old. So it's a really interesting trial. And how have you found participation? How have you found parents responding to? Because it's a very interesting. You think cell
How do you
therapy.
approach parents? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be like, cell therapy, what does that mean? So I'm really interested to see the sort of feedback you've got from parents.
So I've been very privileged because I've been involved since the last 10 years. So I've got very good understanding of what parents feel like. Most NICU families are so generous, as you know, they're just amazing. With this trial, particularly the autologous trial, when we did the safety and feasibility, because remember the randomized trial is not, it's all ethics approved, but it's not running yet. With the safety and feasibility study, most parents, so we had more than 70% consent rates.
Okay.
So obviously we have to have a very well-informed consent process like
That
you would
seems
do
very
for any.
high. Is that unusual?
It's very high,
That...
and I think that's what gave us hope, and that's what gave us a lot of positivity, because you're right, Nat, mostly it's less than 50%. Consent rates are less than 50%, so 70% plus. I think the selling point for this particular trial has been the autologous nature of it. It is using your baby's own cells for their benefit. What I was more worried about, was that when we do the randomized control trial, what will parents feel? I'm going to take your baby's cell, but I'm not going to give it back to them. So that I felt would have been, and I think the test of the pudding will come when we actually start running the randomized trial. But in consultation with our consumer groups, so we have a consumer group at Monash, and we also have a consumer group with the Cerebral Palsy Alliance. And recently we formed another consumer group with our cord blood work. So we've got a cord blood consumer group, because I'll just touch upon very briefly. Not every baby can actually have enough cells for us to see benefits, possibly, because we think we need a particular number of cells. So, if I have a baby whose cord is very small or thin, and we can't get any cord blood and cells from them, they're not going to benefit, obviously, isn't it? So we are in the lab. Our next trials, probably in the next few years, is going to actually work on expanded cells. So we are going to grow these cells and multiply them. So it's quite wild if you think about it. But so we are working with a consumer group already, while we are working in the lab to see what they think of this as well. So obviously everything will go through rigorous testing and ethical processes. But so we have 3 consumer groups which we kind of tap on to help with that. And I would love for yourselves and other networks, if they want to get engaged with our consumer participation, that will also be great. But if that kind of gives you an idea of, I think parents generally are very keen when we tell them that it's your baby's own blood. But obviously, like I said, the feasibility of this is probably 70-80%. So even if we have parents agree to doing the trial, it's not every baby we will be able to have enough cells which we think are going to be beneficial for them. Which kind of takes me to the next trial, if you don't mind, if you didn't have any questions, because there are 3 trials I want to talk about, and maybe you may run out of time in your show. So I'm very happy for you to break it into a couple of episodes if it's easier for people to take it. But
that's great.
Yes, some of these babies, Mel, Nat, and M, do not have enough cells. So we cannot depend on their autologous cells. So we are running a trial, which is a very, very interesting trial, and I'll share that with you. This is also ethics approved and ready to go. So anytime soon we are going to be running this trial, and I'll just share the slide for that one. It's called the ALLO trial. And this is a very interesting and I think a very important trial as well. These are babies, premature babies of any gestation. So babies less than 36 weeks. So, babies who are born premature, not just the extremely premature babies born at 32, 33, whatever age, where unfortunately they suffer a major brain injury. I'm sure you've heard about it. And some of your families might have a baby who suffered this. They suffer a major bleeding in their brain, or they suffer a major white matter injury in their brain. So these are babies with severe brain injury. Luckily, it's not common, but it is present. So, normally it happens in around 3 to 5% of our premature babies. So luckily, it's not a very common problem. But in those who have this condition, it is a devastating problem, because most of them actually have long-term problems, right? Some of them mild, some of them moderate, and some very unfortunate ones, severe problems. We are trying to do what is called the ALLO trial, where, as you can see in this graphic, this is a severe brain injury occurring anytime after birth, which is grade 3 or 4 severe intraventricular hemorrhage or periventricular leukomalacia, or PVL like it's called, which is white matter injury. And we are trying to use publicly stored cord blood. So in many states in Australia, there is a publicly funded cord blood program. This was set up in the 90s to basically help with hematological conditions and cancers, for basically just like blood bank. This was a cord blood bank for cancers in children and adults later on in life. And some families obviously store cord blood privately as well, as you might be aware. But basically, what we're doing for the first time in Australia, we are going to be tapping on the publicly stored cord blood, and we have gone through the Commonwealth process and the OzCord network to get approval for this. So a big lot of hoops to jump through to get approval to use cord blood for this research indication, which is to see if it is safe and feasible to give it to preterm babies who've got severe brain injury. So our conviction is that just like the autologous trials, we feel that in babies where autologous or their own cord blood is not available, can someone else's cord blood be used for their benefit? So it's kind of filling the gap in those babies where we are not able to get to their birth and get cord blood, or even if we got to their birth but there was not enough cord blood to extract those cells, can someone else's cord blood be used for them? So it's a very complex trial, because obviously we need to match the cord blood, just like almost like blood group matching. We need to match if the cord blood cells are not going to interfere with the baby and cause a reaction. When we give someone else's blood, there's always that possibility that they will start what is called engraftment. It's like if you have a kidney given to another individual, you want engraftment to happen. But with these cells, we do not want engraftment to happen. We do not want these cells to get embedded in their system and change their function. We want them to do their job, do their business, and get out of the body within a few weeks. So we'll be doing very rigorous follow-up and testing of their blood to see that these blood cells given from someone else's cord blood is not actually getting embedded into their body. I don't know if it's been easy to follow this one, but it is a complex trial. So, but our hope is that we can show safety and feasibility of this study. And to your networks, I would say that once this trial is up and running, which will be in the next couple of weeks or in the next month, we would be interested if families want to access this. They will need to move their care to Monash, but it's just about advocacy to see, once we start showing safety and feasibility, we'll be doing bigger trials on this. So it's a very exciting time. It's a very nervous time for us as well, because this is obviously quite a challenging trial. And when we went to the consumers to ask them what they felt about it, all of them said one thing: for these babies who have severe brain injury, unfortunately, we do not have anything available currently. Nothing at all. There's no steroid therapy. There's nothing else available for them. For those babies who develop swelling in their brain, sometimes we have shunt surgery. You might have heard of neurosurgery and shunts being available. But besides that, there's nothing. And unfortunately, many of these babies I see through my clinic who get picked up with cerebral palsy very early on, and we give them therapies. And, we are trying to optimize their outcomes. But I think we can do better. So really excited about this study and really nervous about it at the same time, because obviously this is the first time anyone will be doing it in very small babies, giving someone else's cell into their body from cord blood.
And is there an optimum sort of time period to do the trial for the babies? Is there a certain age? Obviously,
it's an excellent question. From our preclinical work, we feel that earlier is better. So basically, when you're at the peak of your inflammation and peak of your injury process, that's the best time. So we want to give this therapy within 2 weeks of them developing the injury. And that's one of the feasibility questions. Is it even feasible for us to find a match? Luckily, our cord blood banks have an inventory, so they can go through their HLA and blood group and they can match them pretty quickly. But still, there's a process to go through the release. TGA needs to approve it. All that kind of things comes into it. So it's quite a complex trial, but we feel earlier the better. There is some work going by the Cerebral Palsy Alliance and especially some groups overseas where they are actually been using cord blood like this for children with cerebral palsy, which is well established. So like, much later down the track, we feel if we do it earlier, the benefits might be stronger. That's our feeling. But, the test will be only when we start doing it.
And what do you think those benefits could potentially look like in a baby in the NICU if they're given it in that early
Yeah. So
period?
see, it's a very good question, Nat. So the benefits, in my mind, mostly are what are their long-term benefits? So if a baby was to have, let's say, motor problems, are their motor problems less? If the baby was going to have a cerebral palsy, is the severity of cerebral palsy less? If they have learning problems, is the severity of their learning problems going to be less?
Yeah.
At an early phase, I don't think their brain scans might show a major difference, but you never know whether it actually slows or dampens the progress of their brain injury on brain scans. Time will tell. That'll be really interesting to see as well. But I don't think it will lead to changes in their brain scan, because the brain scan is a very crude way of testing what their function is like. It just shows a structure. So yeah, see, in our lab experiments, what we see is that definitely the function of the brain injury model we use is much better, and their brain injury markers on their brain is much better. But whether it works in the babies, time will tell.
Yeah. Do you think it will also help with survival as well, or that's not relevant?
You've touched on a very interesting point, Nat, and Nat asks always very interesting questions. This trial also is being led by one of my PhD students, who's actually presenting some of this work in North America right now about the setting up of this trial. So brain injury, severe brain injury, is one of those times, and it's a difficult topic to discuss, but I'll just touch upon it, is one of those times when families choose to redirect care and go to comfort care because they feel that the life of this child might not be very, easy. It's going to be a painful life. And I'm sorry to bring up a difficult topic, but some families choose to redirect care. So they basically do not opt to continue care, which means the baby passes away. So I think that by just doing this trial, Nat, it will give many families hope that maybe we will see benefits. But we do not want to give them false hope, isn't it? We do not want to give them false hope. So that's why we'll be treading very carefully. We will not be giving them any hope that will, lead to survival of this baby or improve survival of this baby. But I can tell you from experience, by doing research, outcomes improve. And many of these babies may have better outcomes than we sometimes predict. As a community, I'm sure Mel has heard about this many times in her experience as well. We kind of give quite pessimistic outcomes to a lot of families because we think we know what they're going to be like. But babies are amazing. They have a great capacity to heal and get better with time, isn't it? So my hidden almost kind of hope is that this will give many more families and clinicians hope that these babies can do better. So you never know the outcomes of those babies who do not have continuing care, isn't it? Whether they would have benefited or not. But I think the idea here is to do more work on this condition, which is a very difficult condition, and hopefully give more hope to both these families and babies. But again, I like to apologize if I've kind of triggered those difficult discussions with anyone in your group.
Yeah, they're difficult, but they're real discussions and real for our families. Yeah.
And I think more broadly for us, this is why we spend so much time involved in this space, is because we want more research, we want more evidence, so that families are assured that what we're doing or what's happening is the best way to go. We want to provide, we want to be able to be part of that picture where here's the certainty, here's the evidence, here's the research.
If I can touch upon something, there is some very good literature on this. As health professionals, when we are providing information to families, if we kind of provide that information in a positive manner, that leads to much better outcomes than when we provide it in a negative manner. So I'll give you an example. So if I say your child has got a 50% chance of major disability, that gives a very negative vibe to the family. If I tell your child has got a 50% chance of a good outcome, that sounds much better. So the outcome is same. It's 50% badness, 50% goodness. But if I tell them that it's a bad outcome, I think that's so I'm a very strong believer of hope and giving positive vibes to everyone. And we need to think positively, and our babies and families who look after these babies show us all the time that they do amazingly better than what we expected them to. So I think I'm just trying to shift the narrative here, and hopefully with our research we can shift it even better than what we can just hope for. So that's the
I love that that you're trialing this as well, because like you say, there is no treatment at the moment. So the fact that the research is being done and there's an opportunity to hopefully improve outcomes for those children, I think it is amazing. My mind's blown with the whole cell therapy. It just absolutely blown away. But I think the investment and research is it's super important for families, for the future.
I realize we are going way over time, but if you don't mind, I just want to present one more trial. Sorry, we are doing so much, and I've got so much to talk about. So I'm just going to present.
Great. I'm writing notes too. But as we're going along, you're answering my questions, which is great.
I will have to jump off at 11:30, but I can jump off and you guys can carry on. So
can you see my screen? So this is the last trial which is currently running, and we've actually got one patient already part of this I want to talk about, and this is even a bit more difficult to discuss because it is quite sensitive. So these are babies who have suffered a brain injury in the womb. So this is called antenatal or fetal stroke. So these are babies who were completely developing normally in the pregnancy, and then for some reason, in some cases we know the reason, they have a big bleed in the brain, or they suffer a big infarct in the brain, which is basically loss of blood supply in the brain. So it's like a stroke like event. You have a major bleed or a major loss. So you can see this, it's called ischemic stroke, which is loss of blood supply, or hemorrhagic stroke, which is basically bleeding in the brain. So we know about these babies when they get scans, ultrasounds in pregnancy. When the pregnant woman is getting a scan in pregnancy, they pick up, there is something not quite right with this baby's brain. So you can imagine it's a devastating time for families, because suddenly your perfect pregnancy has gone completely upside down, and you got a very bad news coming in to the mix, to such an extent that some families unfortunately can't just cope with this news, and they terminate or stop their pregnancy. So again, like I said, it's a sensitive topic. So we lose a number of babies because of this injury. Our team believes, again, the cord blood might be able to help these injuries. Now, it might not be completely getting rid of it, but it will definitely dampen the problems associated. So now, because these babies are known in the antenatal period, we know which ones to go for. So we know that this baby is the one where we want to address it. So we are going to collect the cord blood from those babies. So the baby's own cord blood, again, is being used to see if we can actually safely and actually have the feasibility to be able to give them not one but two infusions, because these babies are born at much later gestation, generally at term, most of these babies, because they don't have premature problems. Very rarely do they have premature birth problems at the same time as this brain injury. We are able to harness much more amounts of cells from them, and we are giving them two infusions. So we've had one baby go through it, and that baby is doing amazingly well. Now, whether the cells were the reason for that baby to do well, we don't know, but the family is just very happy that they continued the pregnancy and they were part of this trial where we use the baby's own cells to see if we can benefit them. So this is an early phase trial. We want to see how much of a burden of disease this is in Australia, to see if it's actually worthwhile doing a bigger trial first. So that's how trials run, that you trial it in a small number of babies first and see if it works. So this study, I would love for anyone who goes through this to get in touch with us. Again, they would need to move their care to Monash to be able to access this, because obviously it's not a big study at the moment. But I just want to spread the message around this, because many families feel that nothing can be done for them, and we are trying to change that. Just like the severe brain injury in preterm babies, for fetal stroke, or major acquired brain injury in the pregnancy, we are trying to change that. So I'm sure I'm coming across a person with a lot of ambition and a lot of hope, and maybe none of this will hold true, but hope is what keeps us going. And that's my message to my team, to any family I come across. We need to keep trialing to shift the paradigm, to do something which is not been done so far. So we are very privileged to work in the space where no one has done anything in the space in around the world, or in Australia. Definitely not much happening here. So yeah, very exciting.
Wow. So in the Stella trial, that's babies that have had a stroke in utero, then you wait for them to be delivered, and then you apply the treatment.
Yeah, and we collect their cord blood, and we harvest those cells, and then give them 2 infusions, not 1, because we feel the bigger the amount of cell dose we give them, the better it is. And it's almost like, if I give a 1 course of antibiotic, it might not be beneficial, but if I give a proper 2 or 3 days of antibiotics, it's going to be useful. So we've got some very good lab evidence on this, that when we give the cell therapy the second time around, it actually goes through different pathways in the brain and actually benefits even more. So that's what we are trying to. So it's quite complex and difficult to sometimes comprehend.
What's the time frame after birth that they get the 2 treatments?
So we give it in the second week of life, and then we repeat the second infusion in 5 days time. So it's like a day treatment, Mel. So it's like you come in for an infusion one day, and then 5 days again you come back for an infusion.
Wow. That's amazing.
But would babies, for example, that have had a stroke in utero after birth stay in the NICU, or does they be discharged after a certain period of time?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. That so most of these babies are born at term age. So and what is amazing about the human body is that, and that's I don't know if you might know the Cerebral Palsy Alliance well. A lot of children with cerebral palsy, you never know what is the cause for the cerebral palsy. You know why? Because the injury might be so subtle in utero that nobody picked it up, and by the time the baby is born, there is no signs. So the baby looks like a normal baby, but when they start developing later on, they have some problems.
Yeah.
So we are looking at tapping on those babies where we have an acquired brain injury in utero, which has been picked up. So that's why the feasibility trial is important, to see if it's a big problem or not. So you'll be interested to see that in the last year, we've had maybe 10 such babies in our hospital itself, where they've suffered an insult during pregnancy. More than half of those families chose to terminate or stop their pregnancy. All right. So I think for me, that's a big thing. I think if we are able to change the narrative and give them hope, I think it'll be great. So most babies, in answering to your question, Nat, actually do not have major signs of problems at birth. It is later on when the problems start appearing. So this baby which I'm talking about, which we are actually going to do some media about as well, just to raise awareness for this trial, is basically at 3 months has gone through our clinic, the early detection of cerebral palsy clinic, and we did not see any problems in that baby so far, which is amazing. Now it doesn't mean that baby's got no chance of learning problems or behavioral problems, because it's too early to predict those. But definitely from a motor point of view, we don't see this child having major problems from movement and so on. So for the family, that's really reassuring. So that's really reassuring. So it is a difficult one. It is a very difficult one, because these babies do not have problems when they're born, but we know in pregnancy that there was a problem.
And so my other, sorry.
No, I was just thinking about Kylie Facer from Little Stroke Warriors. Have you had dealings with them, with her?
Yeah, so Kylie is actually involved in another stem cell trial, which is not
She's
going on
amazing.
at the moment with the Sydney network. So I have been in touch with her, and actually,
Okay.
Mel and Nat, I don't know if you're aware, we are actually running our second cell therapy symposium in Sydney in June. So Kylie is one of our speakers on that one.
Fantastic.
So
That's
we are spreading the word by having these symposia where we bring health professionals, parents. We'll be discussing the nitty-gritty details of all these studies, from their conception in the lab to their studying in babies, and working with families, regulatory bodies, because these are all obviously highly regulated. Any therapy, it's a biological, it's not a drug,
Yeah.
it's a biological. So biological therapies have got a raft of ramifications and regulatory hurdles we need to cross through. So all of this sounds possible, but it's pretty difficult for us to do. So it's taken me
No,
many years
I
to
fully
kind of.
understand, because I'm part of the advisory board for the milk bank,
Yes.
Lifeblood Milk Bank, and I know just all the red tape and what it took for that to just try and get off the ground. So even though it's a human product, it definitely has to go through a lot of a lot of rigorous process and testing. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions. Firstly, I love the way you explained the importance of the cord blood, which has made me, because we've spoken to Himanshu about the WAM trial, which is wait a minute or more, and the delayed cord clamping and the importance of that. So that's really
that was amazing.
Yeah, to understand how important that cord blood is. And I remember years and years ago, there was so much discussion about banking your cord blood and things like that. And then it kind of seems like it's dropped off. So it's incredible that you're focusing on it again and to such a level. So a couple of questions. The first one that I did have was, it was going to be their own cord blood, and you said in the first trial yes. And then I thought, I wonder if there could be a donor program like donor milk, and then that's the second trial. So that was a yes. For the parents that you said may have, like, if you bank, I'm just trying to think of the process. If you bank your baby's cord blood, can it be used at a later date? So even the ones that may have gotten the placebo, you're still storing, you're not going to discard their cells. So if they ever need to access them later, is that still a possibility?
It's an excellent question, Mel. So there are two aspects we need to understand. So we'll obviously, all cord blood which we store through our industry partners, we store it for 5 years. So we store it for 5 years. We can't store it for lifelong because there's a cost to it, isn't it? So storing it for lifelong is a big expense. And obviously the families can choose to store it on their own account, but we can't store it beyond 5 years. So that's what we do. And there's a reason why we chose 5 years. These are preterm babies' cord blood. So the amount of cells we get from them is not equal to the amount of cells we get from a term baby.
Yeah.
So if I stored a term baby's cord blood, the cells which are available in that unit is much higher, obviously, because there is more blood, more higher cells. So for the preterm baby, their own cord blood is well sufficient because they're small. You know this very well. So, those babies are small. The term babies and the children who may benefit from it later on, those cells are not going to be enough. So like cord blood used to be stored for adult conditions, most of that cord blood or all of that cord blood is term cord blood because it's a huge good amount. The preterm cord blood, even if it's for their own self, may not be of huge amount much down the track. Now, having said that, my own team is working on what is called expansion, isn't it? So we are trying to see if we can actually expand that. So if our technology, which is already in the States and Canada, they are able to expand cord blood, but nobody's done it in preterm. So we are trying to see if preterm cord blood can be expanded as well as term, and then it may be of benefit for them long term. Now, I want to just mention one thing, like you mentioned, Mel. Cord blood was quite an in thing a couple of decades ago. Less and less people are storing cord blood nowadays because the indications for standard use of cord blood therapy is going down because the cancer specialists have got other ways of harnessing cells from other parts of the body, like the
Yeah.
bone marrow and even peripheral blood. So if I wanted a therapy for my cancer, I don't need to depend on my cord blood as much as I may have needed or depended on it a couple of decades ago. I hope it answers that question. But basically, the uses of cord blood is going down. But we think if these trials of ours shows benefit, maybe they'll go up again. You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you know? So would every baby or every premature baby have their cord blood stored in the event that once they're in NICU, you see that there's a need for it because they're showing a brain injury or things like that?
Yeah.
Like that.
So in the cord cell trial, these are targeting less than 28 weeker babies. As you know, around 50%, 30 to 50% of premature babies born less than 28 weeks have some problems long term. And like Nat said, those problems might not be cerebral palsy. They might be more often, learning problems, behavior problems, and so on. Our families were very happy that we give therapy to everyone. So we are not giving the therapy to only those who show that early signs of brain injury on ultrasound scans. So it's to everyone.
So this could become standard of care then for any baby born under, like if you show that there's positive outcomes, could everybody? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I need to show the efficacy first.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it
So
would just be
and
standard.
when we were designing this, families as well as our collaborators and researchers across the world said, we could target only those babies who suffer a injury, or we could target everyone. Almost everyone said, no, let's do it in all babies because it's a baby's own blood, and any benefit to them is worth that. So any benefit to them is worth that.
If in the long term that you find it's effective, and in years to come, and like it eventually starts to become or look like it's becoming a standard of care, is it something like a standard of care that's only like that could only be what's the word, accessible, that would exist in certain like resource-rich countries, or is it a standard of care that's feasible enough to be introduced, implemented in like lower to middle income countries? I know this is probably a bit off topic, but just curious.
No, but it's an excellent question because we have thought about that as well, Nat.
Okay.
This is called implementation science, So if you do a therapy which you can only do it in particular centers, it's not great, So implementing in every center or every possible center which looks after such a small baby is our goal. So what we're doing is we're doing a phased workup on that. So initially we are doing it in around 10 centers around the world. And if it starts showing benefit, our plan is to expand it to more places, because you will understand there's a bit of investment which goes around, extracting the cells. We actually have to cryopreserve them as well, because we give them 1 week or 10 days later. We need to put them into storage. So you need to have the facilities for storage and also. But most good hospitals, if they have a good blood bank facility, they will be able to, expand on that. So, but as you know, many places, in fact, most places around the world who have poor outcomes for babies are not in the first world or high income settings. In fact, I do a education program where we go to low income settings, which I can talk about at some other point, where basically we go to the really poor resource settings, and reaching those settings is always going to be a bit more difficult. But remember, those settings currently do not provide care to less than 26 or 28 weekers. They do not have the resources to provide those care to these high. So it is, for now, it is a high income or a middle income kind of target. I would love to become a low income, but I need to show efficacy first.
Yes, first steps.
So I just have two last quick questions. For maybe particularly the allo trial, the second trial, can parents who have full term and don't have any issues with their pregnancy and delivery, can they donate their baby's cord blood for projects? Is it similar? Like, where do you get that donated blood from?
Yeah, so it's a good question. You'll be almost surprised to hear, Mel, that we have a lot of banked cord blood.
Oh, okay. It's already there.
So the Australian government actually is saying, what are we going to do with all this bank cord blood? Because the use of cord blood for hematological and cancer indications is going down.
Oh, okay. So you've got storage.
we have a lot of
repurpose.
and the Cerebral Palsy Alliance is actually pushing the government to repurpose that cord blood for cerebral palsy itself. So these are children with cerebral palsy at 2, 5, 10 years of age. So we are hoping that this trial which we are doing will help their case as well, because there are a couple of sites in North America which are actually doing cord blood transfusions or cell transfusions for children with cerebral palsy. And some of our families are having to go overseas to access that. So we are opening many doors. I just hope we don't close other doors while we open some.
And then lastly, so the 3 trials that you've mentioned, what's for parents that may be eligible and like the trials are coming, what's the consent process? Like, when do you approach them and start talking to them about the trials? So
the autologous or the baby's own cord blood, we talk to them at birth or soon before birth. So we actually have a consent where we can collect their cord blood, but we don't do anything with it till we actually get their approval. Because sometimes preterm babies come and deliver, the poor mother doesn't even have time to talk to anyone, the baby just comes out.
Exactly.
So we have ethics approval for our big trial where we can collect the cord blood and then don't do anything with it, because cord blood can stay in room temperature for a day or so before we need to do anything. So it's basically the placenta's cord blood is going to be thrown away. We can just collect it and then we discuss with the family, do you want to get into this trial? Okay, so that's called a deferred consent process, which is a well understood process. Some of these families will consent before birth. If they come in and stay in hospital for a couple of days before the birth of the child, we'll consent them. All right. In the allo trial, the consent process is only after the baby's been identified with a major brain injury.
Okay. Yeah.
And with the fetal stroke or the stellar trial is the same. The obstetricians and the sonographers pick up the injury, and then if the family chooses to continue with pregnancy, that's when we get involved.
Yeah. Fantastic. And so for parents that are watching and want to learn more, how can they do that?
It's a good point. I'll share some resources with you, Mel and Nat, so that they can put it on. So we have we have a web page where they can access. I'm not a big social media buff, but I do have a Twitter profile, so they can follow us and get in touch with us. But generally, if they just search my name, Atul Malhotra, on Google, put cell therapies, they should be able to find a lot of our literature and my email and everything else. So I'm very happy to talk to any family, but obviously, like I said, not every trial is open to everyone.
Yeah.
And because these are still early phase trials, they will mostly be done at Melbourne in Monash, because we have the facilities. And slowly, as the other trials, the bigger trial which I mentioned, starts spreading to the other states, we will have options of doing those trials elsewhere as well. But yeah, the early phase trials, as you can imagine, they are very strict, regulated, and we need to do it in one center. Will be at Melbourne.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm pretty sure that we could keep talking about this, and I think that we'd love to have you back on later to see how it's going and what the results are. I think this is really exciting and really important work for families, particularly how you mentioned how there's some, conditions and some treatments, or that there is no treatments for. So for what happens for our babies. So thank you so much for all your dedication and your passion, and it definitely shines through, and you've got so many different things happening because you really want to help. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and sorry for going over time.
No, that's okay. It's important. I mean, parents, this matters to them, and this is stuff that they're going to want to hear about and obviously be involved in. So thank you so much. It's wonderful. We'll have all the information of how people can learn more and get involved in all the notes and the captions attached to this episode.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. See you later. That's a wrap on another episode of the NICU Live Network. Thanks for joining us today. To stay connected, please make sure you're following us on social media.
And if you found value in this episode, please share, like, or comment.
We'll see you on the next episode.